Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Now, this time around, we are looking into one of the stranger friendships in modern geopolitics: North Korea and Russia. It is the bromance we didn't see coming, and frankly, wish we hadn't. But here we are, because now, in addition to artillery and ammunition, North Korea is sending actual soldiers to help Russia's floundering efforts in Ukraine. Kim Jong-un's troops are crossing borders, not to fight a Western power or defend their homeland, but to prop up Putin's struggling army in the mud and cold of the Kursk region, at least for now. Now, why on earth would North Korea do this, and what is it getting in return? Well, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Russian lawmakers see this ratification no doubt as a great victory. During Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, North Korea has been perhaps the only country to openly support the aggression. The defense treaty was signed by Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un during the former's visit to North Korea in June this year. The agreement's details remain unclear in several regards, such as whether Moscow's nuclear umbrella would also cover North Korea. Since then, both sides have engaged in a series of high-level talks. There have been reports from Ukrainian officials that North Korean troops have been engaged in Russia's Kursk region. To make matters worse, North Korea has also been continuing to carry out missile tests. The most recent one was a mere days ago. No one is more aware of this threat than South Korea. Seoul has supported Ukraine, but has so far refused to supply certain kinds of arms to the war-torn country. This might soon change, however.
We have avoided supplying lethal weapons, but may reconsider based on North Korean troops' activities.
Seoul has also called on the United Nations to demand a withdrawal of North Korean troops from Russia. South Korea's foreign minister has called the military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang illegal and in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. As the reports of engagements with North Korean troops come to light, the war in Ukraine might be taking a new and very dangerous turn.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Sending its soldiers abroad in support of another country's war effort is an extremely unusual move for the Pyongyang regime, which usually prefers to isolate itself. But desperate times call for desperate allies. Russia needs boots on the ground to offset its staggering losses, and Kim Jong-un needs a powerful friend who can offer security guarantees and diplomatic legitimacy. Money, also. It's the kind of situation that screams, "I'm not sure who on earth would ever date you, but I'll make it work." Reports indicate that North Korean troops have set up camp in Russia's Kursk region. This marks Pyongyang's first foreign military deployment in, well, ever. These North Korean forces aren't there to admire the countryside. Their mission is to bolster Moscow's sagging military lines and, let's be real, to help Putin maintain his illusion of control. But there is a third player entering the arena: China. Because anytime you have Russia and North Korea cozying up, Beijing is undoubtedly in the background, watching very, very carefully. China and North Korea have been friends, though sometimes also frenemies, since the Korean War. But as much as they are historical allies, China's government doesn't want Kim Jong-un poking the West too much. After all, a destabilized Korean peninsula isn't exactly in China's interest, and neither is an overly empowered Russia in Asia. China wants to be the center of its own region, not surrounded by unpredictable and powerful allies. Hence, while Beijing has been trying to hold back from outright condemnation, you can bet they're quietly frustrated by the potential complications this move might cause. And honestly, it's kind of fascinating, if it weren't so terrifying. By all accounts, North Korean soldiers are now part of a European war. It sounds ridiculous, because, well, it is. The situation is also Putin demonstrating that he has an ally, however unconventional. For Moscow, this is about survival. For Pyongyang, it's about relevance and also a chance to test its soldiers' readiness and gain combat experience. Why wait for a conflict on your own turf when you can let your soldiers practice halfway across the world? And for China, well, it's a headache they probably didn't want. In the end, the Russia-North Korea partnership feels like a disaster waiting to happen. Moscow has found a surprising new friend. Kim Jong-un has found a high-level international role to play. Whether it ends in mutual benefit or a mutual train wreck, this alliance is one we'll be watching very closely indeed. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is William J. Jones, assistant professor at the Macedon University International College, and Vera Konstantinova, former foreign policy advisor to the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello.
So, North Korean troops are on Russian territories and they are actually engaging in combat with the Ukrainian forces. First time such a situation has taken place, no doubt a form of escalation. So, Vera Konstantinova, what would you say about the Western response to that? Or perhaps I should say the lack of such a response?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. And first and the most important part, really, we are waiting for more coordinated and more tough response from our Western alliance, but not only in Europe, but also in Asia Pacific. As you probably know, there was already a telephone call between President-elected Mr. Trump and President of South Korea, and it was already a telephone phone between President Zelensky and President-elected Mr. Trump. I believe that would be a starting point for a coordinated response to these new updates, but as well there is an information that our partners from G7 countries, they also think about the practical steps, how to respond, and the most important part, how to practically impact on the North Korea as well as Russia in order to prevent further deployment of other countries' troops in Ukraine's war.
So this sounds good because so far we've only had condemnation, we had the acknowledgement of this being an escalation, for example, by Mark Rutte, but words alone will not stop it. William J. Jones, well, it's impossible to ignore the US elections. So do you think that under Trump, the response perhaps might be different? We know that Trump was trying to engage with Kim Jong-un, calling him a rocket man and all. This ultimately didn't bring any lasting progress. So what do you think is likely to happen now?
So thank you for having me. Given the recent election of Donald Trump, I think we have to perhaps reflect on his previous administration. And I think the biggest question right now is whether he will put in his cabinet some of the same individuals who some would argue perhaps undercut him or weren't in line with his foreign policy direction vis-a-vis North Korea. Hopefully, we can't tell. Perhaps he learned some instructions and took some insight from his previous term in office, and will put those in positions who will carry out his foreign policy direction. I think that's the main takeaway right now and the big question.
So, Vera Konstantinova, what do you make of this alliance between Russia and North Korea generally? Would you say that it holds substantial benefits for the Kremlin? So far, we've seen that these troops apparently are not really that great. And there were even reported instances of friendly fire, with the North Koreans firing at the Russians. What do you think is the Kremlin going to get out of this in the end?
First of all, we should realize that if Russia decided to involve the foreign troops of North Korea, it means that Russia has great problems on the battlefield. And of course, there are several estimations how many troops can be deployed. I have seen the number, and President Zelensky had already announced 11,000 soldiers from North Korea. But at the same time, it means that Russia does really have a lot of problems on the battlefield. The second point, I would say that indeed we can realize that these allies, Russia and North Korea, they are allies due to the need, because Russia as well as North Korea, these countries are under the sanctions regimes, and we have also the Iranian counterpart that also helped to combat Russian troops in Ukraine. But at the same time, it means that from perspective of global stability and international security, we need actions. We doesn't need declarations. We do need actions right now in order to prevent more tragedy not only in Europe but also in other regions, including in Asia Pacific, because we do have a China factor. And I hope so that after these developments and deployment of North Korean troops, we would have a clear understanding that we need to stop Russia and North Korea right now.
So, William J. Jones, with the mention of China, we're actually moving on to the crucial thing here, namely, what does Beijing really make of this? Because it does seem like it might not exactly align with Beijing's plans, not only for the conflict, but also for its role in the region in general.
Indeed. I think we have to understand this within the broader context that the steps the Russians took in June of this year to sign the bilateral treaty, the bilateral security treaty with North Korea, I don't think we can underestimate the role perhaps that China played in this. Simply put, given the position of Russia in the world and its difficulties under the sanctions and whatnot, and its increasing dependence on China, of course, for its lifeline economically and whatnot, it would stand to reason that President Putin definitely had to consult and perhaps even seek consent to some degree in his rapprochement to this degree with the North Koreans. That being said, given the limited deployment that we've seen so far, of estimates of a few thousand troops, I think this is still within the range of a limited escalation that can be managed, especially since it's within Russia's internationally recognized borders, and these haven't been deployed overseas or outside of the territory of the two treaty signatory states.
So, Vera Konstantinova, what do you make of it? There were certain comments suggesting that for China this could be an awkward situation because China doesn't really want to encourage the creation of, strong blocks of countries facing against one another, like, an Asian equivalent to NATO, which could happen if this sort of cooperation between Russia and North Korea proves to be stronger and stronger. In short, one of the commentators said, today's China is not the China of the 1950s. They have different priorities, and perhaps if North Korea becomes too strong, it would actually be less of an asset and more of a liability.
I would agree partly because, of course, there is an opinion that China is the stakeholder of North Korea as well as Russia. But at the same time, due to the help of Russian regime, due to the assistance and payment that permitted by Chinese counterparts, the North Korea regime, they exist for a long time period. But at the same time, I believe that in terms of stability within the region and broader context, I mean global stability, involvement of North Korea and this alliance between Russia and North Korea, that's not in the interest of Chinese leadership, because according to the declarations, according to their strategies, they do rely on the Western cooperation. They do rely on the technologies they could achieve and they could gain from the West. But at the same time, economic stability as well, I believe that's a very important part of the strategy. I also believe, I hope so, that the Chinese leadership would contribute to the peace and security in Europe, but at the same time they would also stabilize the situation in Asia Pacific. But again, I'm not so optimistic because currently I see partly engagement within the defense industry. As you probably know, there was an information regarding the Chinese contribution to the Russian defense industries and the lifting of sanctions on Russia due to the full-scale invasion to Ukraine. That's why I believe that we need to have some kind of dialogue between, for example, United States and China, because it would mean the stability of the globe in the nearest future.
William J. Jones, let's talk briefly about the non-proliferation they mentioned here. Is it in China's interest to see the transfer of Russian technologies into North Korea and thus the creation of a more and more powerful nuclear-armed state, which might at some point perhaps stop taking direct orders from Beijing and start, pursuing its own policies, perhaps destabilizing ones? In short, would you say that China's stake in the non-proliferation system across the world might actually prove crucial here?
Oh, most definitely. Not just the Chinese, but also the Western countries as well have a deep-seated policy stance towards non-proliferation of nuclear technology and weapons. And I think perhaps we can see this in the context of strengthening the North Korean regime to an extent to where it is stable, because this is also a fear of the Chinese, deep instability along its border and perhaps a failing regime in North Korea leading to broader instability. But I would suspect that this is a managed process between the leaders of the two countries, namely China and Russia. I think it would be outside of the bounds, perhaps, that Russia would transfer sensitive high technologies without some degree of consultation and consensus building within the Chinese government as to what sort of weapons and technologies would be transferred.
It seems to be the paradox that China does not want to see the collapse of either Russia nor North Korea, but it doesn't want to see them becoming too strong either, which perhaps is something that the West could seek to exploit at some point. William J. Jones and Vera Konstantinova were our guests today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern Newsflash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. While the dust has settled over the US presidential elections, the Kremlin, interestingly enough, has yet to officially congratulate the winner. Instead, independent Russian investigative journal Vyorstka says that Russian elites have congratulated Donald Trump in secret.
According to Vyorstka, Vladimir Putin was to have congratulated Trump through some friends and the Russian Foreign Ministry. Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, is also among those who are to have joined the secret congratulations. This controversial former Russian president has become infamous for his inflammatory claims and statements in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But what of Russia's closest ally? Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko hasn't congratulated Trump. He did acknowledge his victory, but simply called him a capitalist, while praising Sino-Belarusian ties.
Donald Trump's victory in the elections has sent shockwaves across the globe. Poland is no different. Warsaw's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has already urged for more to be done when it comes to European and Ukrainian security.
Missile interception is the best shot Ukraine has at protecting civilians and critical infrastructure from Russian attacks. And as NATO ministers are gearing up for an upcoming meeting, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski says that intercepting Russian missiles by NATO may be considered. But Ukraine isn't the only thing on Sikorski's mind. In the wake of the results of the US presidential election, Sikorski has called for immediate action for Europe to strengthen its security capabilities.
Change, it seems, isn't limited to just the United States. Just recently, the German Chancellor sacked his finance minister Christian Lindner in a move which has collapsed the country's three-way ruling coalition.
This decision may spell trouble for more than just Germany. Scholz justified Lindner's dismissal by saying that the minister had refused to relax spending rules to increase aid for Ukraine. The former finance minister says that the Greens will remain in the government, but his pro-business Free Democrats have left. This means Scholz doesn't have a majority anymore. It is likely that Germany will be sent into snap elections. And the future of aid to Ukraine will hang in the balance then, as a right-wing AfD will look to make its mark in German politics.
And moving back to the subject of Ukraine and Russia, a recent report by The Insider says that the Russian army has been conscripting African migrants who were lured to the front either by deception or by blackmail.
Russia's influence in Africa has been spreading, and not just of the political kind. Be it through military service, such as the Wagner Group, or through soft power, Moscow has been investing more and more in relations with Africa. Many African leaders themselves have been tightening cooperation with Russia, and African students have been flocking to the country in hopes of a better future. That future, it turns out, is nothing more than the front lines in Ukraine for some. Reportedly, military contracts have been offered to foreigners by Russia under the guise of work or security guard contracts. Since the war's beginning, there have been thousands of such cases.
End of the line for this episode of Eastern Express, but please don't go away as we've got much more coming up here on TVP World. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.